Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. It has been way too long, a few months at least, since I've come at you with a new video. I am back on it. I'm tired of procrastinating, tired of putting it aside. I want to make more content and I want to talk more about sports. A little bit of a change now. So rather than my channel just being my name as Chad O'Shea, I am going to name this channel Sportegrity. So Sportegrity Media is kind of an idea that I've had for a very long time. Just kind of something that clicked with me. Just to kind of, be the main point of my content. And with Sportegrity, basically the idea that I have behind it is I want to focus more on the positives of sports. So positive stories, positive things that have happened, just things that I really like about sports. My first idea as far as content goes is going to be more of a weekly review. So I'm going to aim to upload these videos every Friday and get on a consistent upload schedule. So thank you for hanging in with me, and I'm excited to see what I can do under the name of Sportegrity Media. So with all that being said, let's get into some of my favorite sports stories that I saw this week in the sports world in general. Number one is with Alex Smith. So if you watch the NFL, you already know a little bit about Alex Smith's story. But if you're not too much of a football fan, what's really great with Alex Smith, he's the quarterback for the Washington football team. And a couple years ago, he suffered a major leg injury. And it was a long way to rehab, long way to recover. But Washington held on to him, and a few weeks ago he came back and got back onto the field. So it was a really cool story there. But this last week on Monday against the Pittsburgh Steelers, he led the Washington football team to a impressive upset against the undefeated Steelers. So it was a really great story, and it just keeps getting better because with Washington, they've really struggled with that steady quarterback play. So with Alex Smith, now that he's come in, he's kind of got that veteran experience, and this is a team where the defense is kind of coming together. They do have some weapons on offense, and with Alex Smith at the helm, they have a really good shot to win the division and host a playoff game. And so this story with Alex Smith just keeps getting better, but what makes it even better is the team around him is really, getting better alongside him. So a lot of cool things happening with Washington with that. But this is a story that all sports fans can really root for if you like to see these awesome things. Especially for me, I just love to see it. A similar situation with Teddy Bridgewater a couple years ago and how he's come back and he's a starter again. Anytime an athlete goes through a severe injury and they're able to come back when, all the odds seem to be against them, I really love seeing that. So happy to see Alex Smith start to prove himself more and more, that he is a very underrated quarterback. That's something that I've believed even before his injury, but now that it's multiplied even more with seeing what he's doing with Washington to try to lead them to the playoffs. And speaking of the NFC East, so not only with the Washington football team, you also have the New York Giants coming together and being impressive in their own way. As last week they upset the Seattle Seahawks. So for the whole season so far, the running joke has been the NFC East and how terrible those teams are, and that, a team's going to win the division with like a 5 or 6 win record, if that. But now all of a sudden, you got Washington and New York, who have proven that they can beat good teams. Their defenses are really becoming pretty good, and their offenses are starting to kind of gain some momentum. So that's what's really interesting to me is the NFC East. I don't necessarily think the winner is going to be too much of a threat in the playoffs, but whoever comes away with that division between Washington and New York, they're going to host a playoff game. And I think that's really going to be a trap game for, a team like Tampa Bay or the Rams or the Cardinals or even my Vikings if they somehow miraculously make the playoffs. It's going to be a trap game. So I love to see what's going on with the NFC East. And, suddenly it's a close race. And, whichever team comes out of that, I think has a real good shot to make some noise in the playoffs. Now, another cool thing in sports that I saw this week is a cool story that the Undefeated posted about Derrick Rose. So with Derrick Rose, he's someone that I've really respected a lot. You think about just 10 years ago, he won the MVP. He was the youngest NBA player to win an MVP. And now, he's kind of delegated into a role of being a veteran or a mentor. But in Detroit, he's really embraced that. They just drafted Killian Hayes. I think he's one of the highest draft picks in Pistons history. But they spent a lot of capital on a pick like that to kind of grow for the future. And with Derrick Rose, With being a starter last year, he had a really good year. He averaged 18 points a game, shot 49% from the field, so he was a pretty reliable starter. But even though they're choosing to go kind of with the future route rather than stick with Derrick Rose, he's really embraced that role. And a lot of veterans would kind of feel intimidated having a rookie come for their job. But with Derrick Rose, it's just impressive to me. And with this article that the Undefeated posted, they kind of went in depth on, this week in practice, how Killian Hayes got the start, but then Derrick Rose, in their scrimmages, but then Derrick Rose came in and really offered a lot of advice to him. And so, in that article, they kind of went in depth with Derrick Rose, talking about how, with how his career was going, in the early stages with being the youngest MVP and how good Chicago was. Derrick Rose mentioned, people often ask what if with his career. And I've done that a lot too. What if Derrick Rose would have stayed healthy? What if that Bulls team would have, been a contender for years to come? I honestly think they would have won 1 or 2 championships. But rather than thinking of it that way, Derrick Rose has really, found some positives in that as well. So, he likes to think that if he didn't go through that, he wouldn't have scratched the surface of the person that he is now. And so, I think he said he would have been so brainwashed or, caught up in the lights or something along those lines. So that's really cool to me, to a guy like that who still has a lot to give for an NBA team. But he's kind of taken a step back, and if they decide to roll with him as a starter, he's still going to produce. But if he's relegated to a bench role, I think he's someone that could be, a pretty reliable scorer and might even be a candidate for 6th man of the year if he can stay healthy throughout the year and do well in that sense. So just cool to read a little bit more about Derrick Rose this week. Now, another cool story that I saw is with the Army-Navy football game. So typically every year, Army and Navy play at the end of the college football season, and that's kind of the only game that week. Usually it's just a showcase. It's kind of a historic or traditional game. So every year it's a pretty cool game to watch, but this year, especially with everything going on, they've had to shake it up a little bit. So usually the game is, played and hosted by Navy, but this year it's hosted at West Point. So Army is going to host the game, and it's the first time that they've done so since the World War II era in 1943. So it's been 77 years since that. So that's just really cool to me. And, it makes you think like what times are like back then compared to how they are now. And obviously it's a very different comparison, but it's pretty cool to see, through the turn of events that everything going on in this world with COVID and how it just, cancels things left and right with sports or postpones everything, that Army and Navy found any way possible to make it happen regardless. And ESPN posted a really cool article about it this week, talking about how the superintendent with West Point said, essentially this game must be played however possible. And he said, we'd play this game in a parking lot if we'd have to. So you got to love the grit and determination between both these sides to just respect that longtime rivalry. And, also the historic aspect of it too. They played this game through 2 world wars. The last time was in World War II, but they also played it through the First World War. So that's also pretty, interesting. I like to see kind of historic things with sports in that sense. But, if they can manage to fight through 2 world wars to have this game played, I think it's possible to make it happen through a pandemic, and that's exactly what they're doing. But looking back in that article that ESPN posted, they talked about how back in 1943, Congress was debating whether it was worth it to play the game, to use their resources or their manpower to just, still have that game. And President Roosevelt at the time, he wanted them to play. And so there was a little bit of a kind of a unity aspect with America back then. So that was pretty cool to see. I always like to see stories like that. And, this one I thought was just really cool to see that Army and Navy are still playing, and they're able to do that in the pandemic. And, that the roots of that rivalry go all the way back then. And, they're able to make it happen as any way possible they can find. And one of the last stories, maybe my favorite of the week, is seeing Fort Hays State, a Division II basketball team, go on the road against Kansas State, Division I Big 12 Power Conference team, and they pulled off the upset. But there's so much to this story that I just love so much, to where it's like all the odds were against them, and Kansas State still found a way to lose to a Division II team. And maybe I find a little bit extra pleasure with being a Kansas Jayhawks fan and seeing a rival go down like that. So maybe not everything about this new channel is positivity. Maybe there's a little bit of salt thrown here and there. But that's really cool with Fort Hays State and seeing what they were able to do this week. So it was really interesting. Leading into the game, Fort Hays was 0-3 in conference play. I think that was their total record too. They might have played one or two games before that. But it was just an exhibition game for them. So the result wasn't going to count against Fort Hays State's record, but the result counted against Kansas State's record, because basically it's against a Division II team. And if you win, yeah, you get the record, you get the win. But if you lost, you get the loss. So it was interesting. And on top of everything going on with them beating the game, leading up to the game, the head coach for Fort Hays State tested positive for COVID-19. So the head coach, Mark Johnson, wasn't able to be on the sidelines. Also, their top assistant coach, so Jeremy Brown, he's been an assistant there at the school for 15 years, since its 15th year this year. He was a close contact with Mark Johnson because they rode in the car together at one of the games. So he couldn't be on the sidelines. So Fort Hays had to turn to a second-year young 29-year-old assistant coach, Todd Johnston, to be the head coach for the game. So he's thrown into that role. A lot of uncertainty, in general with a Division II team, but they come into that game and their first game against a Division I school in 4 years, and they pulled it off. They won, and it was a historic upset, against Kansas State, where they were the first Division II team to beat a major conference team in Division I on the road in 20 years. So just a really cool story. There's so many things about this that I find funny, but it's just awesome that, kind of that any given Sunday mentality where any team can win on any day. So that was really cool and a little bit inspiring at the same time. So that's going to do it for this video today. It's a little bit shorter than it might be. Maybe all my videos will be a little bit short like this. And, I don't know exactly how long it's went, so maybe it is a little bit longer. But I hope you enjoyed this episode of Sportegrity and kind of my weekly review. So, every week I'm going to aim to get these posted on Friday or Saturday, depending how busy my work week goes. But this is something I want to do. This is something I'm passionate about sports, and I've procrastinated way too long, and I really want to start making content again. So if you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like, comment on this video, engage, all that YouTube stuff you hear all the time. And it would mean a lot to me to support me on this journey. And I'm looking forward to this next weekend of sports and this next week to see what kind of cool things come up, because every week there's something cool, something different, something shocking or interesting in sports. So I'm excited to go on this journey and hope you follow along on the ride. Thanks everyone, and enjoy your weekend.